Hello and welcome into episode 160 of the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. I really appreciate you joining me. And man, folks, we've got a good one today. My guest on the show is Lauren Kaufman. And let me tell you this, if you don't know Lauren, here's what you need to know. Lauren is a fantastic educator on Long Island in New York. She's been an elementary teacher. She's been an elementary and middle school literacy specialist, an instructional coach, a mentor coordinator, an assistant principal, and currently serves as the director of literacy in her district. But Lauren's so much more than that. Lauren is very much somebody who pulls that same level of passion about leadership that I do. And man, I'll tell you what, when Lauren and I sit down and have a conversation, it's just like, bang, here we go. So much good stuff about leadership. And I'll tell you this too, Lauren is a brand new author. She has a new book that was released here recently. It is titled The Leader Inside, Stories of Mentorship to Inspire the Leader Within. And man, if you follow Lauren and if you've read any of her blog, you know that she is a really, really strong writer and does some phenomenal things. And this book, man, she took her writing to a whole nother level in this book. It's so super, super good. And like every chapter, folks, contains dozens of actionable ideas that are designed to help you develop those leadership skills, to develop courage, and to develop more passion around what you do. Whether you're an early career leader or you're in the middle of the road or you're just needing a little bit of a boost, man, Lauren's book is absolutely for you. She's going to sit down with me and have a conversation not only about the book, but just about leadership, about how she approaches things, about a little bit of her story behind the actual writing and how she became a blogger and then ultimately became an author of a published book. And honestly, folks, there's a piece here in this particular episode where Lauren talks about the importance of asking for help. And she talks really, really deeply around how that's not a sign of weakness and how as leaders, we have to start viewing that a little bit different. This is a great episode. I know you're going to love it. So get comfortable, grab that cup of coffee, grab that cup of hot chocolate or that glass of red wine, whatever it is that you're having as you're sitting and enjoying this episode. But make sure that you do, because you are going to love every second of this. You'll get the whole thing right after this word. Hello, leaders. This is Darrin, host of the Leaning Into Leadership podcast. Are you ready to take your leadership and your team to the next level? As a leadership coach and speaker, I'm passionate about helping school leaders and leadership teams like yours gain clarity and walk confidently in your purpose. In today's fast-paced educational environment, it's easy to get lost in the noise. My mission is to help you cut through the noise and focus on what truly matters, building positive culture, leading with intention, and making decisions that align with your core values. Whether you're looking for a keynote address, a hands-on workshop, or a transformative leadership retreat, I tailor every experience to meet the unique needs of your team. I believe that when leaders are clear about their purpose, they can lead more authentically and create a ripple effect that impacts every level of the organization. If you're ready to inspire your team, foster deeper connections, and drive meaningful change, I'd love to work with you. Let's make your next event more than just another meeting. Let's make it a turning point for your leadership journey. Visit roadtoawesome.net or reach out directly to book me today. Together, we can lead with clarity and with who is the leader you wish to become. When you take a look on Amazon at The Leader Inside, Stories of Mentorship to Inspire the Leader Within by Lauren Kaufman, you will find that is the very first line that tells you what this book is really all about. And man, when I see that and I think about developing leaders and helping leaders really grow and be the best they can be, what a great question to start a conversation. So I'm going to use that as the statement to start this conversation. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Darrin. It's such an honor to be here. I've been following your work for quite some time. And I don't know if you remember this, but I actually met you through a book study for your book. many years ago, The
Yeah.
Road to Awesome. And I thought, you were
Yeah.
so engaged with your readers, and you were so engaged with people who looked up to you. And I really admire that about you and your work, how responsive you are. So I feel so honored to be sitting here in this seat, having this conversation with you and your audience today.
Well, that is very, very kind of you. I do remember that. Absolutely, I remember that. That was a lot of fun. And I remember, I think we did that through Voxer, if I remember correctly. And certainly met a lot of really great people that were out there. And I was honored that you guys were wanting to read my book and wanting to talk to me about it. And now we're in the opposite place with this. With now, Lauren has a book out, and there are going to be people wanting to do book studies and wanting to just dive into this book. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today here on the show. But before we do that, to maybe kind of, I guess, set the audience, in the right direction here, let's maybe spend a couple of minutes talking about who Lauren is. Maybe share just whatever you would like to share about your journey and who you are, so that our audience has a little better idea of who Lauren Kaufman is.
Sure, I would love to. The trajectory of my path has been really cool and really surreal, to be sitting here today with you and saying, oh, we're going to talk about your book today. That's still very new to me and a little bit foreign, but, I'm starting to get used to it. But, I'm almost 2 decades in education. This is going to be my 19th year formally in education. But my path really started when I was a little girl. I mean, my parents were both educators, so from a little girl, I got to see the power of education and the impact of great educators and how they have such a strong influence on the hearts and minds of kids. My parents taught in the town I grew up in. So anywhere we would go in town, their students would be running up to them saying, oh my goodness, how are you? And you made such an impact on me, or you were the best teacher ever. And even now when I walk around in town, people come up to me and say, how are your parents, Lauren? So that's pretty cool. My grandfather was a law professor, so he taught at the college level. My sister's a teacher. So I'm in good company with educators all around me. But it also started very young for me because I was always a very observant person. I still am to this day. And I got to observe a lot of great educators and human beings who have been placed on my path. And I look at those people as lanterns that have really guided me in certain directions. And some of those interactions, a lot of them have been very, very positive and very meaningful. And even the unfavorable interactions, those have helped me too along my way. But, as far as education is concerned, I started as a teaching assistant. I was a classroom teacher for 2nd and 5th grade. I taught in the New York City Department of Education. Then I wanted to hone my craft with teaching reading. I just love teaching kids how to read. And I became a reading specialist for elementary and middle school. And then I was an instructional coach, which is a really special part of my career because that's when I got to come out of the walls of my classroom and go into other classrooms and see all of the amazing learning and teaching that was happening in the walls of those spaces, and got to cross-pollinate some amazing ideas within the district I served in. So that was a really exciting role that gave me a real nice taste of leadership. And then during that time, I was also serving as the mentor coordinator in my prior district, K-12. So I had the honor of pairing new teachers with wonderful mentors who can set a strong foundation for them and guide them on their whole journey, and hopefully set up long, meaningful careers for those teachers, right? So I found that role to be super important. And then now I took the leap to a formal leadership role. I started in leadership as an assistant principal. So I was a building leader. Now I'm a district leader. And here I am today. All of those experiences have brought me to this moment now. It's helped me lead with a very special and unique lens because I'm able to step into the shoes of so many different roles because I've lived it, right? But I also love learning about new roles that I haven't lived. And that's really continuously shaping me into the leader I'm still becoming.
Yeah, I love that so much. And, you said a few things in there, honestly, Lauren, that just, like made me go, oh, I want to talk about that. Ooh, I want to talk about that. The one that's standing out most in my mind, when you talked about transitioning out of your classroom into an instructional coaching role and how you got the opportunity to go in and see so many other classrooms. I remember making the leap out of the classroom into my first assistant principalship and going into other people's classrooms and seeing that it didn't necessarily look just like what was happening in my classroom. In some cases, it did. In some cases, it was very different. In some cases, it was really good. And I'm thinking, wow, how come I didn't know this when I was a classroom teacher? I'd be so much better now because I saw this teacher and I saw this teacher and I saw this teacher. And there were occasionally those that were like, oh boy, whew, this person, we need to help this person, right? What was that experience like for you? Those first, handful of days that you go into other classrooms and it does or it doesn't look like what your classroom was like.
Yeah, it is so interesting and eye-opening. And it actually even happened before I was an instructional coach, because when I was a reading specialist, I used to push into a lot of classrooms to teach reading. So I got a little taste of that even before stepping into that instructional coach role. I think when I stepped into the coach role, I was able to go into a lot more classrooms in various buildings, where when I was a reading teacher, it was in one building. But it was eye-opening, because I think you have a certain expectation when you're in the four walls of your own classroom. It's this expectation that this is happening in every single room, and it's not. Even if you're teaching the same curriculum, you're following the same scope and sequence as your colleagues. Everyone has their special, unique lens that they bring to teaching and special magic that they bring into those spaces. And even the way teachers connect with kids is so different. One way is not really better than the other. It's just your special way. So I think that, and of course, like, you go into classrooms too, and you see practices that you're like, wow, why didn't I ever think of that? And then sometimes you're like, oh, I don't know if I would have done it that way, but this is a cool opportunity then to have those conversations, to leverage that moment to elevate that practice, which took some time in an instructional coach role to gain that trust and connection and relationship with a teacher where you're able to do that. But it was cool. It was eye-opening, and it made me realize the goodness of being able to look at things from a macro perspective, not just a micro perspective, and see how things really can affect an organization at every level. I think when you're in your own classroom, sometimes you're so focused on your students and your kids and what you're doing, and you make decisions, and it's sometimes hard to understand why other decisions are being made, maybe at the building level or the district level. But when you get out and you see, okay, now I understand why those decisions were made, because there's a bigger picture here, and I'm just one piece of the puzzle. And when we put all those puzzle pieces together, it forms this beautiful picture. So, I think that there was a lot of goodness to that, stepping out of the classroom, although I'm a teacher at heart, and sometimes I do really miss having my own classroom with kids, because there's nothing like, leaving that legacy behind, right, in the classroom with kids.
Right. Yeah, for sure. That is very, very true. And it just ultimately, I mean, your classroom just changes a little bit, right? And for the most part, instead of, you're not really teaching kids anymore, you're teaching adults. You're supporting adults. And you said something in there about that micro perspective versus the macro perspective. And certainly now on your progression from classroom teacher to instructional coach, or reading specialist, instructional coach, AP, now at the district level, there's been a lot of different, I guess, increments that you've moved, from, say, right at ground level to right now, you're probably operating at about 15 or 20,000 feet. If we think of it that way in terms of your role, what are some things that maybe you've experienced, or maybe some insights you can share with leaders on how each time that perspective for you maybe has changed just a little bit, moving from one role to the next?
Wow, that's a really great question. So for me, if I'm speaking to leaders, and no matter what role of the organization you're serving in, I really think it's important to be grounded in your district's mission and vision, no matter what, because that is something that will ground a conversation all the time, no matter what role you're serving in. It levels the playing field, right? So what's the mission and vision of your district? What are the goals that you're trying to achieve at the district level, at the building level, at the teacher level? When you're talking to teachers and you're working closely with teachers or other leaders, thinking about how we can leverage one another's gifts to really make an impact, because we cannot do this work alone. This work should not be done in silos. We all have expertise to bring to these experiences, to these conversations. I think having lived in all of those roles and now being at this district leader, having that district leader lens has helped, because you're able to really, really impact at different levels of the organization, understand what it's like to sit in the shoes of that person. So you're able to ask the right questions. I think asking the right questions when you're interacting with people really helps you row in a better direction together. So it's like, what are you doing and why are you doing it? What's the mission and vision? What is it that you're looking to achieve? I think having a clear understanding in a conversation from that, and how are we going to get there? What are some small actionable steps we are going to do to row to that destination together? And who am I going to pull in to help me do it along the way? You know, you just mentioned in my blog that I had asked for help. You know, that was the name of the blog. And years ago, I might have looked at writing something like that as a weakness, that I'm showing everybody that I do need help, you know, sometimes in my role. It's too big not to ask for help. But really, what I've come to know, Darrin, over the course of time, is that asking for help is one of the best things we can do as leaders. You know, breaking those barriers of isolation down and being vulnerable and having the courage to say, hey, I'm really not sure how to do this, but I know that my colleague does. I'm going to invite them into this conversation. That's a really important part of stepping, you know, going through all of these roles and now having this district level role where you are leading a group of people that might have more expertise than you in certain areas. That's important to notice, and that's important to name, and then that's important to leverage in every conversation and every experience that you have with your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's spectacular. You've hit on some really, really key pieces there, and I love that you brought in the blog too. You know, you're asking for help post. We were talking about it before we hit the record button. That was the one that you just released this week, and it's so very good. And I like how you talked about that too, and you talk about it in the blog itself, about how that shift in perspective from asking for help being a weakness to actually being a strength and being a way. You talked in there about how that is an example of how, and I think you quoted Simon Sinek, that's a way to help build trust, that you build trust by asking for help, not by not needing help. Talk just a little bit about that, and then I really do want to get into into your writing, honestly, but talk about that just a little bit.
Sure. Yeah, I love that Simon Sinek quote, you know, where he says that asking for help is what builds the trust, and it's not the other way around. I think that there are so many things that happen in a day in education, right? In a week, in a month, right? Think about all the accomplishments we have in a year. These things can't be done alone. They just can't. You know, I think there's so much to know. There's so much to be privy to. And I think that because of the relationships that we build with people in our organizations, we all have different relationships with people. We all have different skill sets. We all have a different knowledge base and also background that we're bringing to the table. And I think that it's okay. For me, a big learning curve was operations and management. When I first got into, leadership, it was all this school safety, and which is number one priority, and student life, number one priority. Those were areas I was very strong in, curriculum and instruction, right? I had served in those roles forever, but now I'm stepping into a building and I'm really responsible for kids, for the well-being and safety of kids and adults. Who do I go to for that? I'm not going to pretend that I know things. By reading a manual, that's not helping me, right? It's helping a little bit because I understand the what and the why. I understand we have procedures and protocols and things like that. And this is just one example of your question, but I'm going to go to people like the principal that I'm working with, like other lead teachers in the building who are on the safety team. I'm going to ask them a lot of questions. I'm going to ask them their thoughts. If something happens and I don't know all of the answers and I have an idea of the way I want to solve a problem, but I want their input and I want their feedback, because maybe that's not the best way. Maybe they're going to give me an idea I've never thought of before. And that's another piece, Darrin. I think earlier in my career, I used to think that my way was the way. Thinking back, at every level of the organization I served in every role, I may have thought that at one point. But now I know that that's not the case. My way isn't the only way. My way might be a great way, but everybody has another great way. And when that saying, like, great minds think alike. Well, first of all, I think great minds think differently. And I think great minds think better together, right? So when we all come together and we have a conversation about whatever it is that we're working on, that's asking for help. You're inviting other people into that space. Help doesn't have to be this formal thing. You can't figure something out, so you're going to go and ask for help. Asking for help could mean that I'm going to invite other people and invite them to a seat at the table for this conversation, because I know that the outcomes are going to be better with their voices in it,
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Yeah. That's again, I mean, as I read that one, I'm just like, wow, this is every leader needs to read this one, because you're right. I think most, I won't say all, but most leaders early in, especially early in their career or early in a new role, will fall into that trap of thinking they have to be everything to everybody, right? Or that, they have to be, the smartest person in the room, or have to have all the answers, when in reality, the further, if you will, up the leadership ladder you go, the more you should be leveraging all the other people around you. As you said, they're all intelligent people. They all will have really good ideas. They will all have great ways to help solve a problem. We've just got to be willing to ask. And I just find that really, really powerful. So let's do this. I want to talk about your writing. I definitely want to get to the book. Before we get to the book, you and I had talked a while back, and this is a question. Get used to people asking you this, right? Mm-hmm. Once you publish a book, once you have a book published, people want to know what was the thing that drove you to write the book. They'll also want to ask you, tips and ideas to help them, go write their own book, right? But I know for you, a lot of it started with blogging, but there's a little bit more to your writing story. So maybe share a little bit of, whether it's your writing process or the story that led you up to writing this book.
Absolutely. I love this story. So about 4 or 5 years ago, when I was facilitating the mentor program that I brought up earlier, and I was going on an interview for that role, I wanted to bring a book to the interview that I would use as a framework for the mentors and mentees, as a foundation for our learning and for our learning journey together, that fit into the mission and vision of our district. And I stumbled upon The Innovator's Mindset by George Couros. I didn't know anything about this book. I just looked up the reviews. I said, this sounds like a book that could be a really great framework for what I'm looking for. So I read the book and I brought it to the interview, and I said, this is what I'd like to do in this mentor program. And I ended up getting this job, right? during that time, I had reached out to George Couros, who is such an amazing leader and speaker, and really engages with his readers and his audience. And I said, I'm using your book in this mentor program. Would you mind making a video for me to share with the mentors and mentees? Well, it turns out he was traveling during that time, and he sent it to me from the airport, like right then and there. I think 5 minutes later, I had a video. He's like, is this good enough? And I said, oh yeah, this is awesome. I'm like, wow, this guy's really cool. He sent me a video, and the teachers are going to be so excited. During that time, he also visited the mentor program virtually. And that was the moment that changed the trajectory of my career and my writing, was when he challenged me in front of the mentors and mentees. He said, Lauren, he said, you have really good ideas. You really need to start blogging, and you really need to start writing them down. And I thought to myself, oh, I don't know. What do I have to share that no one has seen before? He goes, that's not why you write, Lauren. You write to reflect on your learning. So I started. I remember the first blog I ever pushed out. I was so nervous. I was perseverating over this blog. I was looking at the grammar. I was looking at the content. I was looking at everything. And I finally pushed it out, because it's a little bit scary to put yourself out there. Who am I? I kept thinking, who am I? Like, I'm not a blogger. I don't see myself that way. I know I'm a writer. I always love to write, but am I a blogger? Am I a real writer like that? And I remember pushing it out, and that was it. And ever since then, so it started a little slowly. Like, I would blog once a month, and then it became twice a month, and then it became once a week. And that's really what I try to do now. So within that, I started coming up, I think, as you blog and as you write and reflect on your learning, I think you start, at least for me, I should say, you start coming up with a style of writing. My style is very much like, I tell you a story, I connect it to some research. So it'll be a book or a podcast I listened to this week, sometimes multiple books, multiple podcasts. And then I think about practice, okay, story is awesome because people can connect to story, or they make it their own. Research is awesome, and quoting books. But now, how does this look for me? How did it look for me in my world this week? How did I implement these ideas in what I'm doing? And how does this look for you, the reader, in your world? Because just because it worked for me this way doesn't mean it's going to work for you in that way. So I really try to, when I write, it's like unwrapping this present, at the end, it's like, okay, I've opened it up. I see it now. I'm excited about this. And what am I going to do to implement these ideas tomorrow? And I usually have a section in my blog that says actionable ideas to implement tomorrow. Not for every blog post. Like this week, I didn't have that. But if it makes sense, I do. And what happened with that is, George again contacted me, and he said, Lauren, because he says, now I think you're ready to write a book. And I said, no, I'm not. I said, I'm not ready to write a book. I don't think I have it in me. I don't think I could do this. And then maybe like 2 years later, I had contacted George, and I said, okay, what do I need to do to write that book? He's like, you're ready? You're ready to write the book? This is like 4 years later. I'm like, I see it now. I was able to see it because taking that leap from going into leadership really kind of solidified the story for me. I was able to see it. And what's really cool about blogging, believe me, I do not blog to get likes or retweets or anything like that. The first and foremost, I write to reflect on my learning. And then if it resonates with others, that's an added bonus, right? Like, that's really cool. It's connected me to a lot of people over the last several years because they've said, oh my goodness, I printed out this blog and I shared it with my administrative team, or I used it for a professional learning experience. And that's not why I initially wrote the blog, but the fact that it's landing into the hands of other people, that was pretty cool. So what is cool though, is I can see my blog stats from another end. People can't see that. I can see my blog stats. And I started noticing a trend. What is really resonating with people? Anything around leadership and coaching, anything around mentorship I was putting out there, I noticed, wow, these are getting shared pretty wildly. Like, universities. I could see they were getting open through emails. And I said, there's something to this here, right? So I started taking those blogs and weaving them together to create this book, which became The Leader Inside, Stories of Mentorship to Inspire the Leader Within. It's really all of my writing woven together from all of those years. And then, of course, I added to it to build that bridge to make the story to come together a little bit more. But once I was ready to write, Darrin, and I had my content and I was ready to put in that proposal, I knew exactly what I wanted to write about. I had 3 sections: the path to the leadership inside, mentorship matters, and stories of impacting courage. The other piece to it is I knew that I wanted to bring in other voices to this book. That was really important to me, to spotlight people who are also doing incredible work in the education space, because I'm not doing this work in a silo. I have thought partners that I lean on. So I very thoughtfully selected 5 women who I consider to be mentors and guides. I know them all personally and professionally. So I have Lainey Rowell, who's I met her when we were contributing to the book because of a teacher. She's amazing. She's been such a great mentor to me. Stephanie Rothstein, another great leader in the education space, especially in the ed tech world. Natasha Nur, she was an instructional coach with me. This is her debut of writing in a book. So I was happy to bring her with me. Megan Lawson, who's a great friend, and I always call her the closer of books, because Megan Lawson she speaks in quotes, and her words are she's so prolific as a writer. And I know she was like the closer of the contributors. And then my 4th grade teacher, Mrs. Roth, who retired as an assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, she's writing in the book with me, because when I was going through my leadership interviews, she was mentoring me and still is. We talk every week. So that shows you the impact, right, of educators from a very young age. She discovered the leader inside me at a very young age. And we're still together to this day, where I think it's pretty special that our story is now memorialized in this book. And in that chapter, it's very special because we write back and forth. It sets that chapter apart from the other chapters a little bit, because we have a conversation in that chapter about our story. So that's my story about writing. And Darrin, I'm like 140 blogs in now. And, when I look at this book now, I go, oh my goodness, this was like part 1. I blogged so much since I put in that book proposal, So, maybe there's something else waiting there. But it's been quite the journey.
I'm sure there is. That's the thing about writing. Once you get started at it, you find just this continued, I want to keep going. I want to do more. I mean, I'm writing 2 books right now. I've got 2 different projects, that
Amazing.
Which in and of itself is kind of crazy, because it's like, how do you separate the 2 projects, right? I struggle with that a little bit sometimes, but yeah, once you get started with the writing, it becomes kind of addictive. It really does. And you mentioned your contributors, and both Lainey and Megan have been on the podcast before. Steph is somebody I've been connected with for quite some time too. I think it's amazing that you brought some additional voices into your book. I always enjoy reading books where there are other people who have contributed and have other thoughts along the way, so it isn't just the one author. So I think that's really, really cool. So let me ask you one more question about the book, and then we'll get to the final question I ask everybody here. I'm curious. So as a listener out there, listening to you talk right now, and you've talked about what the book is and kind of how you got around to that. What's one thing that you would hope that a reader of the book takes away from going through reading your book?
Yeah, thank you for asking me that. So I think this book, by the way, speaks to educators and leaders alike, because I think if you're working in education and you're working with kids, you are a leader. And it's very important for your listeners to know that this book is all about being able to discover the leader inside, no matter where you serve in your organization, and also helping others discover their inner leader inside. That's a really important piece. That's what leadership is. Whether you're in a formal leadership role or not, when you're able to recognize the gifts in others and help them notice those and illuminate those gifts for people, then they can pay it forward to the next generation of people who want to step up and be leaders in their own space. So that's about the path to the leader inside. There's a big section on this book around mentorship and how to develop a mentor program in your school district that will set that strong foundation for teachers and leaders alike. And then those stories of impact and courage, it's all real, authentic experiences grounded in interactions that we've had on our paths, whether they were favorable or unfavorable, who have shaped who we are still becoming as leaders, as human beings on our journey. So there is a lot of story involved here in The Leader Inside. You will discover a lot of new reads throughout the book because I name a lot of books. I name a lot of podcasts. I name just people who have helped me along the way. And then there's actionable ideas, tons of them, that you can implement with your leadership teams, with your teacher teams, with your mentorship program that can be implemented immediately. So this book is really a collection of stories that can positively impact others with some real cool, actionable ideas to discover the leader inside.
Yeah. That's outstanding. It's really, really great stuff. Okay. We could just keep going and going and going. I love just sitting here and having conversation with you. But we have reached that point in the show where I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody here on the podcast. This is a Leaning into Leadership podcast. So Lauren, how are you leaning into leadership?
I'm going to say that gifts live within exceptional educators, and they're just waiting to be unwrapped in the right place at the right time with the right people. And regardless of our roles, we will show up and we will realize that perfection is unattainable. It's really our imperfections that shape us as leaders, and to really use those setbacks and obstacles we face as a bridge to your future. So that's how I'm leaning into leadership, is making every interaction count, listening attentively to people, not being reactive, but being responsive to everybody's needs, and bringing people along the journey with me.
That's outstanding. I love that. I love that so very much. People are going to want to get in touch with you. They're going to want to learn more. They're going to want to read the blog, all that kind of stuff. How do people find Lauren Kaufman?
I know there are a lot of spaces on social media. I would say the first place to connect with me would be through my website, laurenmkaufman.com. You can certainly email me. I love connecting with educators, but I'm also on X and all the socials as Lauren M. Kaufman. I'm also on LinkedIn too. Those are the places I've been frequenting. But yes, please reach out. If you decide to get the book, it'd be an honor. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Or if you just have a question or you want a thought partner, I'm there. I'm in.
Right on. Love it so much. We'll make sure and put links in the show notes for absolutely everything that Lauren just shared there with you. So you can go and get connected with her. So you can go and get the book. You can go to her website, go check out and subscribe to her blog, all of that wonderful stuff. Lauren, thank you so much for joining me here on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Darrin. And thank you to everyone who listened today. Bye.
Who is the leader you wish to become? That's how I started the episode. That's how I started the interview with Lauren Kaufman. And that's how I want to conclude that, because I think Lauren does such a wonderful job of, again, pushing that question back to us and allowing us to reflect on who we are and who we want to be as a leader. Thank you again to Lauren Kaufman for joining me here on the Leaning into Leadership podcast. Folks, make sure you get down there in the show notes, hit all of those links, check out Lauren's blog, get a copy of her book, and make sure that you get connected with her. And now it's time for a pep talk. So this week's pep talk, I just want to build on something that Lauren talked about during the episode. And that specifically is it is not a sign of weakness when we ask for help. So often, and early career leaders, I'm talking to you right now, we have this thing about us when we very first start. And if you listen to the podcast regularly, I talk about this frequently, but I've got to come back to it. We have this thing about us. Joshua Stamper said it in the paired episode that he and I did together here this past August, that we put on the cape and we think we have to be the superhero. And when we do that, we certainly aren't going to ask for help, right? Because we're there to help solve other people's problems. We're there to help do more for others. If we ask for help, clearly that's a sign of weakness. Well, if you think about the words that Lauren shared during this particular episode, it's absolutely the opposite. Being vulnerable, being open to help, being willing to admit to yourself first and then to others that, hey, my colleague might be better at that than me. That my colleague might not know more about that than I do. My colleague might be able to help me to be even better at what I do if I'm just simply willing to ask for help. It's powerful stuff, but it's something that we tend to overlook. So be willing to ask for help, be vulnerable, and allow yourself to embrace the fact that asking for help is not a sign of weakness. That's what I've got for you this week, folks. Get out there, have a road to awesome week.